All right, so starting today, we are going to be looking at Game Lab. So we're going to be doing something similar or setting something up similar to what we did with our last game today. We're going to see how it's a little bit different in Game Lab and some of the other things we have to think about in Game Lab. This is a kind of an example of where we're going to be going finishing up today. So we'll be learning how to add in some images because it's going to be very different in Game Lab than it was in App Lab. We're going to be taking some keyboard controls. It's running a little sketchy right now. Usually runs a little smoother. And we're going to see how to apply some text. So there's a few things we're going to be doing in here today. It's going to look somewhat like this by the end of the day. Okay. Open this up in a new window to start fresh. All right. So we're going to go ahead and make sure you, when you're logged into App Lab. You want to log into code.org first. And before, when we hit that create button, we've been going to App Lab. Now we're going to be using Game Lab. So when we first create a new app in Game Lab, new game in Game Lab, however we want to describe it, we could use both names. I'm going to move this over here to make sure I can look at my example, make sure I don't mess anything up as I'm explaining. It's going to look like this. Okay, it's going to look similar to how it looked in App Lab, but it's going to look a little bit different, right? So they start us off with this in our code section, which is this function draw. Okay, so relating this back to App Lab, this draw function is kind of like our timed loop. So the code that we put in here is going to be run over and over and over again as our game goes on. Okay. One thing that we don't have control over here that's a little bit different than how it was in App Lab is there's no number of how often to repeat this, right? It's just kind of always continually running. So the code that we go in here is the stuff that's going to kind of loop over and over again. It's like our main loop, kind of like our timed loop was before. Okay. Other than that, you're going to notice that some of these categories are different. So, for example, we have sprites in here, which was not something we had in App Lab. We have this one called groups. We have this one called drawing. Just like when we started in App Lab, don't worry about everything in there, right? Or don't worry about all the options yet. We'll kind of take things as we need them. Some of these things I do feel like could be a little bit, once we learn the basics, some of them you'll be able to figure out what they do on your own if you so choose. Some of them, might require, more explanation. Okay. So, we've got our code section here just like before. There's going to be some similarities, some different things that we see in here to what was in App Lab. We do not have a design mode. Instead, we have an animation mode. If I click on animation, it looks like this. Okay. So in our Game Lab animation, our animation mode here is where we load in all of our graphics. So any graphics that we might use. Unlike the design mode in App Lab, we don't have like labels or text inputs or any of that. That's just not how Game Lab works. Instead, it uses these images that they call sprites. So if you haven't heard that word before, a sprite is a 2D graphic that is used usually in a game or an app of some kind, right? Specifically, again, 2D. So if you're dealing with a 3D game, right, you're playing whatever 3D game you want to play, Call of Duty, that's not using sprites. Those are me using, the term for that something different. But sprites are kind of our 2D graphics we use in our games here. So I'm actually going to load one in now so you can see what this looks like. So I'm going to hit new animation. So anytime you want to bring in an image or add an image in your game or use it in your game at all, you're going to have to go into this animation mode, just like kind of how we did in design mode before. They only give us one option here, which is new animation. They do have some of these preloaded here, just like how we had the icons in App Lab. Some of these are kind of, I know, like a little kitty looking. It's okay. You can also upload your own. And they also give you an option of drawing your own. I'm not going to click that now, but we'll look and see what that looks like in a second here. So I'm going to start. I'm actually going to use a ship. Oh, you can also search here. Here we go. That's what I want. So I'm going to use a spaceship. And you can kind of pick, when you're doing this on your own, you can pick what you want to use. I'm going to use a ship because we are going to create kind of a Galaga Space Invaders kind of game. So if you've played any of those, it's like where you're moving a ship back and forth and you shoot and destroy the enemy ships. If you want to use other graphics, though, you're welcome to use it. You can use whatever graphics you want. If you want to load your own in, you can. If you want to find something else from their library, you can. I'm going to use one of their graphics, and I think I'm going to go with this blue ship right here. Okay. When I select it, it actually pulls me up into a screen where I can actually edit it if I want. So I can come in here and I can draw on it. I can use my paint bucket tools. I can erase things. I can change colors of things, all that kind of stuff. We're not going to get too in depth into this now. There's also at some point we can also go in and add actually create an actual animation for this, because this right now is just one single image. Again, we're not going to get into this now. I'm just going to load up a single image. Okay. One thing I do want to do, though, after I load this is change the name, because right now this is the name. Player ship 1_blue_1. That's a little much for me. I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to rename this player. Okay. So this is just the name of this image. I just renamed it, right? So anytime you want to use an image, bring a new image in, whether it's a background image, a game character, an item, whatever it is, you have to come in here and add the image this way under your animation mode. All right. So that's all I'm going to do for now is I've added one image that I'm going to use for my character. I'm going to go back to my code. First thing you'll notice, where's the ship that I just created? It's not here, right? It doesn't automatically add it to your game. So you kind of think of like the animation mode is I've added it to like my own personal library for my game of images I'm going to use at some point, but it doesn't automatically apply it to the screen. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually add it so I can actually see it inside of my game here. All right. So the way that we have to do this is a little bit differently than AppLab. So I need to create a variable that's going to hold onto that image. All right. And anytime we're dealing with our images, a lot of the code that we're going to be doing for that is under this Sprites option in our toolbox here. All right. So to create a new object inside of our game using an image, I'm going to start with this very first one they have here, which is the only one that has that purple variable block to it, which says var sprite equals, and we'll look at the rest of it in just a second here. All right, I'm going to take one of these and I'm going to drag it all the way at the top, and it's going to go above where my draw function is. So I'm going to put it up here. Now I'm going to name the variable that's going to hold on to that image I just loaded in. I'm just going to call it player as well. This name does not need to match the name if you renamed the image itself. It doesn't necessarily have to match. Okay, this is what the variable is going to be. That from this point on is going to be kind of how I refer to what that is. All right. So I'm creating a variable that's going to hold on to that image, and it's going to be what I refer to when I refer to this object. So I've got var player equals, and it's going to create a sprites. And these right here are our coordinates for where it's going to initially place that sprite on the screen. Now, just like AppLab, we have those X and Y coordinates. I can see them when I move my mouse. So they give us a little, it's probably a little hard to see there, but it does show right by my cursor, my X and Y. But it also shows it underneath where the run button is down here. If you look down here when I'm moving my mouse, you can see the X and Y coordinates as well. These are set up just how they're set up in AppLab, meaning that 0, 0, 0x, 0y is the top left-hand corner, right? So X gets bigger as we go to the right, just like in AppLab. and y gets bigger as we go down, just like an app lab. All right. 200, 200 in app lab, or I'm sorry, game lab. I get used to saying game lab. 200, 200 in game lab is dead center in the screen. It's right in the middle of the screen. And this is where it's going to place that this sprite, which is going to be right in the middle. That sprite, remember, sprite meaning image. All right. So I'm creating a variable, and that's going to create that sprite. But what I need to do is I need to tell it what image to use here. So I'm telling it to create the sprite, but I didn't tell it which image, right? So to do that, I'm going to use the block right below that one I just used, and I'm going to put it directly below where I created this variable. And I need to put in the name of my variable right here. So this right here where it says sprite needs to match what I named my variable up here. So I'm just going to call it player. All right, I'm using player, so I want to make sure it's the same. If you start doing your own stuff, just remember that these would have to match, and if you name it something else. Then it says player.set animation. This is the image that's going to be used for this sprite. So where it says create sprite, that's what it's going to do here. And I get this drop-down menu, so I don't have to type in the name, but I need to make sure I select the correct one. And this is just going to be what you called it in the animation mode. So if I called this something else, if I called this ship, for example, right, which I could do, I come back over here, I need to make sure I select that one. Okay. Now, this right here sets things up, but when I hit run, still nothing happening, right? I don't see anything on the screen now. When I run the code, I still don't see anything. And that's because, again, this draw function right here is kind of like that timed loop we had in App Lab. It's that stuff that just runs over and over and over again as our game progresses. And although I created my variable and I set the animation in here, I didn't actually tell it to do anything with that, right? I didn't tell it to actually display this yet. So I kind of created it. The code's kind of set up for it, but I haven't actually told it inside of my draw function to run it. So I'm going to go over to world, and the block I'm going to use for that one is the second one. They do give us this draw function right here, right? Is the second one that just says draw sprites. And I'm going to put that right inside. Now when I hit run, it's going to draw all the sprites that I set up at the top of my code. And there we go. There's the ship that I just added. Doesn't do anything right now, right? I haven't given it any controls or anything. I can't move it. But now it's showing my images. All right. Now this looks very boring, so I'm going to add in a background before I do anything else, just so that it's not completely bland to look at and looking at this white, square. So there's a couple ways of changing your background. The first way is under this drawing, and there's one that just says background. So if you want just a solid colored background, this is the way to do it. It's very simple. This is going to go, again, inside of your draw function, and you can select from the list here, or you can type in basic color names. So they have, a few listed here. I could also type it in. Now we can also put in the red, green, blue color values of a color, but that's going to be a little more advanced than what we want to do at the moment. So I'm just going to type in black because I'm supposed to be in space. Oh, hold on. See, I already made a mistake. So this is one thing that you have to think about in Game Lab here, and that's the order of some of these blocks, right? So when I'm creating my sprites, I need to think about the order of things, because if I put what I just did here is I put my background and drew my background after I drew my sprites. So my sprite is still there, but it's underneath the background. So I need to move this above my draw sprites like that. So this gets back to that one vocabulary word that I've been using all year long, which is sequencing, right? So which I just made a mistake on. which means that code is going to run in a specific order, and you need to think about the order your code is running in. So in this case, I need to make sure I'm drawing my sprites after I lay the background down. Otherwise, it's going to lay the background on top of my sprites, and then I can't see them. Okay. So this is one way to load a background in, just have a color. You can also use background images for your background, right? So I'm going to show you how to do that because that's what I'm actually going to be using for my example. Just like with my ship, if I'm going to have images loaded in, I need to go to animation, because this is where all images need to be loaded through. And I'm going to click that plus to bring in a new image. Again, you can upload your own here. If you save it to your computer, you can bring it in. I'm going to use some pre-made ones. I'm going to go to this category backgrounds right here instead of searching this time. They do have this space background, which is the one I'm going to use. When you're doing your own, again, you can use whatever images you want. You don't have to use their pre-made ones. You can bring in your own, or you can use completely different ones. I'm just going to use space. I'll leave that name so it doesn't confuse us. I'm going to leave it space 1. That's fine. Not too long. All right, I'm going to go back to my code. Now, the way that I need to load in my background is going to be very much mirror how I did to bring in the image for my player character. So I'm actually going to get rid of this background block, because I'm not going to need it because I'm not using a solid color. But I'm going to need to create a variable that's going to hold on to that background image and tell it where to show up, right? So I'm going to set this up the same way I set up this one. I'm going to go back to variables, or I'm sorry, not variables, sprites. Could do a longer version of that under variables, but we're not going to do that. And I'm actually going to drag this one all the way to the top, above where my player was. And the reason for that is that, again, that sequencing, right? The thing I made a mistake on before. It's actually good I did, because I would have had to point that out anyway. Your code is going to run in a certain order, right? So I need to make sure I'm putting that background first before I put my ship down, or else my background's going to cover up my ship. All right, so I'm going to just call my background. I'm going to name the variable BG, short for background. Actually, for this one, if you try to call it background, it's going to actually give you a minor error because it actually reserves the name background. So I'm just going to call it BG. Then I'm going to do that set animation. I'm going to put it right below. I'm going to say BG. And I'm going to select that image, space 1. I don't need to add anything in here because this draw sprites is going to draw all of my sprites. And there we go. Now I've got my ship. I've got my background. Now let's think about where I want my ship to actually be. Because right now my ship is right in the middle of the screen. I think for my game, I don't want it to start in the middle of the screen. I want it to start at the bottom. So now I'm going to look at the line number 3 here, when I created my my player variable. Right, so I've got var player, creating that. Remember, var creates the variable. Player equals create sprite at 200, 200, 200, 200. Again, right in the middle of the screen. You can kind of, if you look at my X and Y coordinates, I don't know if I get my mouse directly on it. You can see it's pretty close to 200. 200 is right in the middle. I'm going to change this. I want to start down here. So this is my X coordinate, the first number, and the second one's my Y. So I do want it to start in the middle on my X, my horizontal, but vertically I want it down here. So I'm going to go maybe 350. Let's try 350. So I left my first number at 200, which is going to be middle horizontal still. I want my vertical to be further down. Reset, run. I think that looks pretty good. If I wanted to adjust it again, though, I could come down here. I could do, maybe I wanted a little higher up. I could do 300. If I had, a sprite I wanted to start up here, I could do 100, right? So it's all about where you want that individual sprite to be placed when your code starts running. I'm going to go back to 350, though. Okay, there's my ship at the bottom. All right. So now this is how we pretty much set stuff up, right? So anytime you are bringing in any graphics that you're going to be using in your game, this is how you set them up. So when you start bringing in enemies and all that kind of stuff, this is where it's going to go. So what code goes up here and what code goes into our draw function? Just think back to when we did AppLab. I'm going to cover that in just a second, Olivia. Think about when we did AppLab. This draw function is anything you would put in that move. I'm sorry, your timed loop, right? Your time loop, the thing that repeats. So if it wasn't something we would have put in there, we're not going to put it in for the most part. Anyways, there's a few things that are going to go in here because we're doing them a little differently. But for the most part, anything that wouldn't have gone in your time loop before is going to go up at the top or potentially below. We'll create other functions below when we get to that point. All right, so another thing we might want to set up, and this is actually related to the question I got in the chat, is how to change the size, right? This is too big. This ship is clearly, if I'm doing a game, this could be taking up way too much space on my game screen since they give me so little space, right? And the way we're going to do that is under sprites. They give us a lot of different settings here. We're not going to go over all these right now. Some of these you'll be able to figure out on your own because they're not too complicated. But the one that changes size, because that is actually something I wanted to do anyways, is sprite.scale. You'll notice that these are rectangles. These aren't shaped like the kind of blocks that have like the notches in them. So since they are rectangles, you can actually drag these inside of other blocks. So for example, if I were to manually create a variable, right? I was having a variable in here for some reason. Since these are rectangles, I can drag them inside of those like that. Okay. However, what they also allow us to do in GameLab, I'm not doing that, I was just doing it as an example, is I can drag these straight up into here and it will turn it into this equation block. So I can actually set what each one of these properties is. All right, so I'm going to do sprite.scale. I need to put in the name of that sprites variable. So for example, player in this case. And I'm going to use, this is kind of, you think about it as a percent, but a percent as a decimal, right? So if I do scale equals 1, oops, this should be, actually, no, I already messed up. This should be up here. Scale equals 1, that's 100% size. If I do scale equals 0.5, now my ship is half the size, right? So this is a percent, but as a decimal. 0.5 looks a little too small for me for this one. I'm going to do maybe, let's try 0.75. Do 75% size. I like that one. I'm going to go with 75%. Again, when you're doing that, you're doing your own version of this, whatever images you're using, you can pick your size out. And as whatever you want, right? So this is, again, I'm putting this scale, though, at the top. Anything that you're doing to kind of set up how things are beginning is going to be not inside of your draw function. It's going to be at the top of your game here. Okay. All right. So there are other options we have here. So if like right at the beginning, I know I want to, depending on what your sprite is, sometimes it's turned the wrong way, right? Maybe the sprite that you loaded is turned and pointing this way and you want it to be pointing this way, or vice versa, right? The ship's pointing up and I want to move it so it's pointing this way. I can use like that rotation, right? I'm going to put it again above my draw function. I need to put in the name of that sprite. And then I can put in the rotation I want to set it to, right? So if I do this, now my ship's pointing over that way. So if you need to change that from the get-go, that's how you do it. Or if later on in our code, we want to change the rotation, that's how we do it. I'm going to get rid of this because I want the ship pointing up. But if you load in a different graphic, different image, and you need to turn it, just make sure you're using sprite.rotation. Okay. All right. So right now it's still pretty boring. So I've loaded some images in, but I can't, it's not doing anything, right? I can't move it. I can't have it function any differently. So we are going to add in some keyboard controls. So we did this with our app lab, right? We did this several times. It's going to look a little bit differently in our game lab here. All right, it's going to be some similarities, but it's going to be a little bit different. So we're going to start off going to control for this, and we're going to bring in an if block. Okay. And this if block is going to go inside of our draw function. Just like that. All right, so if you remember back in App Lab, we used an event to keep track of when our keys were pressed down. This time, we're going to be putting this in our draw function, which again is kind of like our timed loop. So this is the thing that's going to run over and over and over again as our game is going through, right? And it's going to keep checking through this if function if our keys are being pressed or not. All right, so I got if, and I'm going to go to world, and I'm going to use key down. So again, this looks a little differently than it did in App Lab. So it's going to be if whatever key I put in here is being pressed down, right? And I'm going to start with writes. So if key down writes, run the code inside. Now there's a few ways we can make our stuff move. I'm going to show you the way we did it initially in App Lab and show you that that works. And then I'm going to show you another way to do it. So if you remember how to do it in App Lab, it looked something like this. So if key down writes, we're going to do our we're going to use this sprite.x. So instead of the so instead of it's good again, this looks a little differently because wow, I'm trying to remember what the actual block is called in App Lab. But where you had to get the y coordinates, right? It's going to look a little differently. This actually looks a little simpler, right? So player.x, because we're changing our x coordinate, equals, I'm going to go to math first and add a plus block in here. So it's going to equal player.x is getting the value of the current player.x value plus however much we're moving every time we hit the key, right? So maybe we'll start with 1 and we'll see how that looks. So our x position for our player character is equal to the current position plus 1 every time we press the right key, right? And there we go. Now my right key is functioning, right? None of my other keys do anything. Right key's working. I might say like, okay, well now that's going really slowly. Just like in App Lab, we can change that number, maybe 5. There we go. All right, you'll notice, I do have to keep hitting reset, and when I hit reset, the screen goes back blank because by default nothing's run, right? Nothing is actually, my sprites aren't drawn until my code actually starts running. Okay, so this is one way to do this. Now we could do it this way. I'm going to show us a different way of doing it, and that's going to be using these velocity blocks. So I'm going to do velocity.x because I'm changing my x velocity. Again, I'm putting in the name of that sprite, make sure it matches what I named it up here. And you can put in what you want your velocity to be. So again, maybe I'll try 5. I hit the right arrow key. But right now you'll notice I stopped touching it and the ship keeps moving. Okay. Now maybe you want that in your game. That could be a feature of your game. You want to if you hit the key, it kind of starts moving that direction, and unless you change direction, it's going to keep that momentum up, right? So we could leave that in here like this. But what I'm going to add in is I'm going to hit the plus on the bottom of my if block. I want it that if there's no key being pressed down, or in this case, the right key is not being pressed down, at least at the moment, I want it to have no velocity. I want the velocity to stop. So I'm going to take velocity.x again, make sure I put the name in, and I'm going to put, so if our key down is right, I want my velocity to be 5, else, meaning that's not true, meaning right now any other key is being pressed, I want my velocity to be 0. Now it's only going to move when I press down that key. Right? Still have no other buttons working yet, but that works. Okay. All right. So for this specific game I'm actually only going to have two directions I'm going to move. I'm going to move right and left. If anyone's ever played, like I said, I'm going to base this kind of on like a Galaga kind of game. If you've never played that, your ship's at the bottom and you can move right and left, but you can't move up, right? You're waiting for the ships that are coming down, the enemy ships, and if they get to you and they run into you, then you lose a life. You can't fly around and avoid them this way. You can only avoid them going left and right. So I'm going to kind of follow that model here. So I'm only going to move my character left and right. So I've got my right arrow key. Now I want to add my left. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to hit the plus again on my if statement down here. And when I do that, I get this else if. So remember, this is the same way we did this under our keyboard controls for our App Lab game. So it's going to check the one condition, right? If my right arrow is being pressed. If not, it's going to go and check the next, that else if. Okay, that thing wasn't true. Is this thing true down here? And then if none of those things are true, it's going to do what's in the else. So I want to actually, after I hit that, this velocity x got moved up to else if. I want to drag this back down to else, right? And I'm going to use else if to check for my left arrow key and give it to the code for that. So I'm going to do velocity. Oh, nope. Got to check the condition first. So I'm going to go world key down. And I'm checking for the left. Like I said, some of these things are definitely easier to do in Game Lab. Some of the things are just different. Right? I think this is a little easier to code than App Lab, at least to understand. All right, and then so else if key down left, I want to take my velocity.x for my player. Make sure I change that name here. And I want to move it the opposite direction. So instead of 5, I'm going to move it -5. Now I can use my right and left arrow keys to move my ship back and forth. Okay. I still have a slight problem here because if I keep going right, my ship just goes off into infinity, right? It just keeps going off the screen, adding, with my velocity going up, over. Now, if I hold left long enough, I should come back. There we go. I don't want to lose my ship off the screen, though. I want it to, when it gets to a certain point, it stops moving. So this right here is the most basic way I can move my ship, but I want to make sure that it doesn't go too far off the screen. I want to keep it on the screen. So to do that, I'm going to have to add in a couple of extra conditions for when I'm pressing those keys down. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit different than how we did it before. So make sure you're paying attention to this part. So I'm going to go to control. I'm going to use another if block. And I'm going to drag the first one. I'm going to set it. The first one I'm going to set is making sure my ship doesn't go off the right-hand side of the screen. So I'm going to put this if block inside of my key down right set of code here. So I'm putting it right inside of that if section right there. So I'm going to say, I got my if, right? And I'm going to start this off my if actually with my less than or equal to block. So I'm going to drag a less than or equal to block. So I'm going to say if my X position is less than or equal to where the edge of my screen is, then allow my velocity to increase. Otherwise, don't, right? So I'm going to say if, I'm going to use that sprite.x again. Oop, make sure it's going inside the one on the left. Say player.x is less than or equal to, and the far edge of my screen is, if I can get my mouse on it, 400. So my screen is 400 wide. So if it's less than or equal to 400, I'm going to move that player.velocity x equals 5 inside of here. So if player x is less than or equal to 400, then increase my velocity or set my velocity to 5. If not, this isn't going to run. So what this is going to allow it to happen is if I keep holding down my block here. Oop, hold on. That's not working correctly. How did I do this before? Let me make sure I did this. I probably need to set that. There we go. All right. So if my player.x is less than or equal to 400, allow that. Now I'm also going to have a else that says under sprites. There we go. Sprite.velocity x player. If that is not true, I want my velocity to be 0. There we go. Now, if I keep pressing that right arrow key, my ship is going to not move past that point. I can't go past there. All right, one thing you'll notice that's different about our X and Y with our images is in AppLab, the X and Y value gave you the top left-hand corner. So if I said get the X coordinate, it would be the left-hand edge. And if I said get the Y coordinate, it would be the top of my image. My X and Y here is actually going to give me the center point for my image. So that's why when I hit over right now, it's going to stop at 400, which is halfway into my ship. So if I wanted to, and I didn't want my ship to go halfway off, I could make this a little less. Maybe I could check out and say 300. That's going to stop me way earlier. It's going to stop me way over here. So I could do like 380. You know, you could test out different numbers. Now, technically, you could do this with some math. I kind of like that. I kind of like being able to go a little off screen, but not take my ship all the way off. If we wanted to do some math, we could probably throw in like the same way we did it in AppLab, which was like take the width of the image and add that in there or whatever. I'm just going to do this. You can set this kind of how you want. If you want to set it 400, take it halfway through. That's fine. I'm setting mine a little bit lower so that my middle of my ship is kind of still sticking out a little bit. That's just my preference. Okay, so I've set up my right, but right now if I go my ship to the left, I can still go off the screen. So I would need to set the same thing up for my key down left. So I'm going to go to controls. I'm going to take an if block. I'm going to put it under my key down left condition. And this one, I want to make sure that I'm not going less than 0, right? So I'm going to go back to sprites again. I'm going to set up, hold on, I'll do math. I'll drag a math block in first. And instead of doing a less than or equal to, I'm going to do a greater than, because I want to make sure it's greater than 0. You can go to the left as long as you're greater than 0, right? So I'm going to go greater than or equal to sprites. Sprite X in there. Like, oop, not ship. That's not what I called it. It's player. Player.x is greater than or equal to 0. Right? So as long as I'm not going, that x value is greater than 0, meaning I'm not going off the screen to the left, then I can move my player.velocity x inside of there. But I also need to make sure I get this if condition in. So I'm going to hit that plus. So if my x position is not greater than or equal to 0, I want my velocity to be 0. Oops, I need to also name this player because that's what I'm applying it to. There we go. So I hit reset, I hit run. Left, stop there. Stop there. So again, it's hidden my ship directly in the middle because 0 is giving me the middle point of my image. So if I wanted to, I could do, where is that equal to, let's see, I did 380 up there. So that was 20 less than the edge. So maybe I'll do 20 here. Let's see what that looks like. There we go. Now my ship's not quite going off all the way. So again, that's going to be your preference. If you want to have your image going halfway off, you could increase this even more if you wanted it like 50. Now I'm going to stop way over there. It's kind of how you want to have it set up on yours. I'm going to go back to 20. I kind of like that. All right. So I got my ship, I got my background, I got my basic movement controls anyway. The last thing I want to add on today, the last thing we're going to look at is how to add a little bit of text to our game. Specifically, we are going to set up the label that's going to hold on to where our lives are and display the number of lives that our player has. So before I even draw the text, I am going to go and create a variable that's going to hold on to that number. So and this is going to be stored again at the top because it's kind of setting up something that's part of the setup for my game, not the thing that's running in the loop. So I'm going to go to variables, and I'm going to use that first one. So remember, when I'm creating a variable, that's when I use var. When I'm changing its value, that's when I use the x equals. Okay. Var x equals means I'm creating that variable, declaring it. It's on the screen. That's the coding term for creating a variable, declaring it. And then if I'm just changing its value, I use x equals. Now remember that because some people slipped up on this one on their last one, and then it gave you that NaN, not a number error. So only use this one when you're initially creating it. I'm going to put that right underneath my scale here. I'm going to just call this lives. And I'm going to set my lives to 3. I'm going to give my ship 3 lives. All right. So this is where I actually set my lives. Now, this is going to be a little different how we do text on our screen in Game Lab here, because we don't have that design mode, so we can't drag in just like a label and kind of put it in that way. So I'm going to draw. We're actually going to use draw to actually draw some text on. And I'm going to put that underneath where my if statements were here. So just at the bottom of my draw function, not underneath. It's got to be inside though. So I'm going to go to drawing section, which we have not. Oh no, we did go to for background color. It's the only thing we visited here. And this is where we're going to do any sort of text that's not, at least not on an image, right? If we do it on an image, we can load it in with animation. All right, so I'm going to go and I'm going to put in, where is it? Text, there it is. So we're going to find the one that just says just text. And again, I'm going to put this underneath my if statements, all of those if statements, but make sure I'm inside of my drawing function. Now, what I type in here is exactly what's going to come up on screen. And this part I want to put in to my quotation marks, right? We're talking about our strings, which means these exact characters in this exact order go inside of quotation marks. So I'm going to type in lives, colon, and if I hit run, you can kind of see it up here in the top corner. That's really small. So these two numbers right here, these are my coordinates of where this is being displayed. So that's the X, which is saying is at 0. So that's why it's right on the edge of my screen, right? That's the X coordinate. And 15 is my Y, which is why it's just a little bit below the very top of the screen. So if I wanted to move this, I could say like probably 0 is probably a little too close to the edge. Maybe I'll do 5 and maybe I'll lower it a little. 25. But again, this is up to you, the exact placement of this. You don't have to use these exact numbers if it's getting cut off, or like you're like, oh, actually, I want it a little bit over there. Or maybe you want to put it all the way over to the left. You could do, or the right side of the screen, I'm sorry. Now it's a little lower. It's still really hard to read. It's really small. So I'm going to change the size. And there is a text size block right here. Now, when we're using for our text, we want to think about the that idea of sequencing again, the order that you're running your blocks of code in. So for example, if I change the text size, I try to change text size, and right now it's 12. That is what it is. I think that's what it is right now. If I type in something bigger, like 25, I hit reset and run, it's still showing up really small, right? Because I changed the size after I drew the text. So I want to make sure I change the size before the text actually goes onto the screen. And there we go. Now I can see it a little, it's a little bigger. Still kind of hard to read on the screen because of the color. So I can also do use a block to change the color, which is the fill. And again, I want to change that before I actually draw the text. This works just the same way as the other ones. You can type in a basic color name, even if they don't list it here, if you want. I think I'll stick with yellow. I think that'll look okay on this background. There we go, lives. Let me check out, let me see what white looks like. Maybe I'll go with white. If I don't list it there, I'll type it in. If you do type in a color name, make sure you leave those quotation marks, because these color names are string values. I actually kind of like the white, I think, better than the yellow. I'm gonna go with that. Okay, so I've got my lives up here, lives colon, right? That's exactly what I have typed in here. But I also want to show that number of lives, right? Whatever the lives variable is equal to is what I want to show next to that word. And this is, it's going to be the exact way we did it in our App Lab project. So if you remember how to do that, it's the same way. So I'm going to go to where I enter in the text right here, this little bubble. I'm going to go to click in here. I'm going to move my arrow key. I'm going to the, too far. Make sure I'm on the right-hand side of that quotation mark. And I'm going to hit the space. So I'm showing the string lives, these exact characters. And now I'm going to hit plus. If I leave that there, you can see I'm getting a red error, so don't leave it like that. Plus the lives variable. So if I type it in like this, it's saying show the word lives with the capital letter and the colon, these exact characters. And then next to that, show the value of what's currently set to the number of lives. Hit run. And there we go. So lives colon set to 3, right? So if I were to have set this differently, when I created this up on line number 6, if I set my lives to 5, it's going to show me whatever the value of that variable is right there. I think I'm going to go with 3 for the moment. Maybe I'll end up changing it as the game progresses. I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to start with 3. All right. One thing you'll kind of notice, and like, you know, these small details matter, and some people overlooked some of these as they went. This is showing up again, these exact letters, right? So, or these exact characters, capital L. So if I were to put a lowercase l here in my string, it's going to show up as lowercase l. So some people, like when they updated their number of lives in the last game, or I mean their score in the last game, because we didn't have lives, sometimes they use lowercase, sometimes they use uppercase, and so like your label actually changed visually as you went. So just keep that in mind. I'm also going to put a space after my colon here, but before my quote. And that's going to actually add a space before it shows the number of lives. Just makes it a little easier to read, I think. Okay. Now there are other options for text, right? There's like an option for, like, for example, a stroke. A stroke is an outline. So if I were to set this to yellow, run, my text actually has a yellow outline here. Stroke weight is how thick that outline is. So there's other options, right? There's like a font. Now, unfortunately, with the font, if I put in that in, I do have to, it doesn't give me a drop-down menu. I have to know an exact name of a font to type in. The one they have it set to right now is called Arial. If you want to change it, for example, one simple one to change it to would be like Impact. I hit run. That's actually, I'm probably actually going to leave that. It's optional for you if you want to change it. This, again, it's a little trickier to change just because you have to know the exact name of the font. Okay. All right. So this is our assignment that's going to be due not next class, but next Tuesday. So your goal is to load up a sprite for your player to play as. You can load up a background. That's not required. If you want to use just a background color, you can do that instead. The way that this code is set up right now, I used a background image. You want to give yourself some keyboard controls to go right and left using the code I used here. And then we're going to create a lives variable and then show it on the screen along with the word lives. Don't just show just the variable value. Don't just put like 3, right? We want to see the word lives and then the value of that. Okay. So those are kind of the big steps we're doing. Again, this is if you were feeling pretty confident about AppLab, this should be easy. If not, this will get you used to how we have to do it in GameLab. So it's going to be a little differently, right? Because GameLab is going to work a little interesting in some ways. Okay. All right. Any questions before we go? Again, this video will be uploaded to the classroom once I'm able to export it and upload it. All right, no questions? All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was like doing like the side thing, the controls,
Mm-hmm.
and I did one of them, like one side I stop when I go to the other side, like left I stop, but
Mm-hmm.
for some reason my right is not stopping when I go all the way to the end of the screen, and it just keeps on going.
Okay.
I don't know what I did wrong.
I might have to look at your specific project. One thing you want to check though is make sure that the less than equal that or less than or equal to or greater than or equal to, depending on which way you're going, is set up correctly. Right. I want to keep moving as long as this is true, as long as it's less than 380. And then also make sure you put that else in there, that if this is not true, right? If it's not less than 380, so it's further to the right, that our velocity is 0, because this is what's actually going to stop us. So that would just be my suggestion, not looking at your code, just double check those items in particular.
Okay.
But if you want to stick around, I'm going to release everybody else. But if you want to stick around, Olivia, I can look at your project real fast and see what it looks like.
Okay.
All right, everybody else, if there's no other questions, you're free to go. And I will see you on Friday. Have a good rest of your day.